Well, we are going to try it. We're shooting for an hour tonight, getting in and out. I apologize. I guess for some of you don't want an apology. You just try to be real quiet and not remind me we hadn't had any meetings. So sorry, I remember. But between upper respiratory infections and shingles, and I just had trouble getting traction. And then by the time I got traction, here we were at the summer starting, which is a horrible time to have the first meeting of 2013. But it was either that or wait till September, and I couldn't see us waiting until September. So here we are, and we will say by video hello to our leader friends who are suffering in Colorado on vacation. Hello, Lees and Wittens, and to our leader friends, the Sims, who are suffering on an Alaska cruise this week. We know y'all would rather be with us, so we will have this available by video. What I want to unpack tonight for you is kind of the culmination of a year and a half of working with a small group structure and trying to give some definition and structure to what we're doing. You've heard it said several times, many times, that community church exists to help people become fully devoted followers of Christ. Community church exists. As leaders, you should be able to finish that sentence. Community church exists to help people become fully devoted followers of Christ. And the exact word, you may say fully devoted followers of Jesus. You finish it in the spirit of that, however you like. So, if community church exists to help people become fully devoted followers of Christ, why do you think small groups exist? It's supposed to be easy. To help people become fully devoted followers of Christ. Because if that's the mission of the church, it's the mission of every ministry of the church. Well, then why do we, if it's the church's ministry, why do we have small groups doing it? Because there's things we can do best in small groups. There are some things we can do best one-on-one. There are some things we do best in a sanctuary with the whole body gathered together. There's some things we can do fine with 40 people in a room. But there's some things that we do best in small groups. And so that's what we want to do in our small groups, is we want to help people become fully devoted followers of Christ in the way that we can best address in that setting. That will leave some of that work still to be done one-on-one. It will leave some of that work to be done in the sanctuary on Sunday morning. It will leave some of that work to be done in a room with 40 people. But we will focus on helping people become fully devoted followers of Christ, which means we want to move people. If everybody was already a fully devoted follower of Christ, we wouldn't have to worry about moving anybody. But a lot of people find themselves in the same position I'm in, and that is, I'm on the journey, but I got ways to go. So I still got some movement I need to make in my life. So what we want to do is help move people. But in order to move people, it's really important that we meet them where they're at. See, we don't demand that they all be where we want them to be so we can meet them. So we meet them where they're at, and we move them at the pace they dictate. We don't determine at what rate they move toward becoming fully devoted followers of Christ. We don't do that. I pray. Be still and know that He is God. He is God. There is a God. It's not us. And so we don't dictate at what pace people move. The truth is, they will dictate that. The Holy Spirit will work on them, but they will have a comfort level they will move at. And so, because we want to meet them where they're at, and we want to help them move at the pace they're comfortable at, it requires different types of groups, and that's kind of what we've been talking about. But we've come to a point now where it's important that we develop some language where everybody can use, and we know what we're talking about when we're talking about different types of groups. It's important that we have that language when we're talking to potential members. It's important we have that language when we're talking to leaders. It's important that we have that language when we're talking to our own group members. So we can communicate in a way that we say something and everybody understands what we're saying. And with a tremendous amount of effort on something that shouldn't have taken a tremendous amount of effort, we have finally arrived. Thank you, Pastor. Because I will overanalyze and just work it to death. We finally arrived at some names that are probably, somebody else may say, well, I got a different idea for a name, good, just keep it to yourself. Because this is it. And so we're going to talk about those different types of groups so we can kind of understand the language. If you want to take some notes, it's a great idea. I'm going to give you a copy of my speaking notes when we're through tonight. And these are not for publication. We're still kind of working through and fine-tuning the language. So we don't want to make 50 copies and start handing it out to the church. But we do want to be able to put things in people's hands, tell them about small group ministry, and have a vocabulary that's addressed. We want you as leaders, no matter what kind of group you're involved with, to understand the group structure so you can help people find the right place. And so it's fairly important that all of us understand the concepts. In figuring out the names, it was challenging because I lay awake at night too long worrying about, well, if I say this, then somebody will have their feelings hurt. And if I say that, somebody else will have their feelings hurt. And it just wears me out, my goodness. And I just need to get back to my pre-transformation, non-Christ-like, where I just say, to heck with y'all. I don't care what you think. That's what we'll do. And so I just worry too much. So that's just that's not Christ-like either. Don't mistake that for transformation. So the three kind of groups we're going to talk about are care groups, life groups, and journey groups. One of those words is very familiar to you already, care groups. Life groups would be a different concept, and journey groups would be another concept. Some of you are going, wait, where's discipleship groups? Well, we'll get there. There are some things that are common to every one of these kind of groups. One of the things that's common to every kind of small group we have is that they're relationship-based. It doesn't matter what kind of group we're talking about, it's relationship-based. We don't have small groups that are not based on relationship. Okay? So they're relationship-based, and the small groups are the first source of pastoral care in our church. What do I mean by that? It doesn't matter, and this will probably become more clear as we talk and work through it. But it doesn't matter what kind of group you're dealing with, when there's a pastoral care need, there's a death in the group and we need food, if there's we need what do you have? Oh, the shower things. Oh, how can I forget those? Spawn of the enemy himself. Showers. When somebody's getting married or having a baby and you need a shower, well, that's where it starts. When you have somebody in the hospital, when you have somebody sick and they need food, somebody's had surgery. That's pastoral care. And sometimes group leaders, they'll call the church, hey, somebody in our group died, who's to bring the food? Hello, you arrange the food. That's pastoral care. It doesn't matter which one of these groups. They're relationship-based, and they're all pastoral care groups. Okay? So I don't want somebody to go, well, let's see, these are the people that care, so down here I don't have to worry about caring. Yeah, you still got to care. Okay, and pastoral care. But there are some differences. And the primary difference deals with how the group incorporates or integrates teaching or does not incorporate or integrate teaching. In the care groups, there is no structured integration of teaching. And when I'm saying teaching, I'm not talking about there's nobody standing up and teaching. But I'm talking about there's no structured time for making sure somebody understood a certain teaching, knows how to apply the teaching, and holding them accountable to apply the teaching. So, now I chose all this words pretty carefully. I said there's no structured time for integration of the teaching. Now what do I mean by that? Well, there certainly may be some unstructured time. You may certainly have, thank you, here. Don't push the table. Okay. Anything else? Yes, you may certainly have some unstructured time. You show up in what you consider to be a care group, and somebody in the group says, I heard Pastor Daniel talk about playing to an audience of one in the sermon Sunday. I didn't quite understand. Can we talk about that for a minute? Well, there you go. You're talking about the teaching you heard. Or you heard him talk about forgiveness. Like, he's talking about forgiveness. I'm just struggling with that. I don't know how to forgive. I want to, but I can't. Could y'all help me work through some of that? There's somebody I need to talk to this week. Could you help hold me accountable? So next week when I show up. All that could be taking place in a care group, but it's not by design. It's more spontaneous. It's more serendipitous. And so that's not to say it doesn't happen here, but it is to say there's not a defined portion of the time that is dedicated to that. When you move to a life group, this is where we struggle because we don't know what to call these kind of groups. We're calling them bridge groups. that really wasn't a name. I would say it was bridging these two things. And bridge group just didn't carry any oomph at all to it. But the bridge groups are the groups that are being more intentional about taking the teaching and bringing it into the group and saying, let's talk about what we just heard in that teaching. May have one or two questions to talk about. And let's talk about how we can apply it. And let's have some accountability so that we can talk about whether or not we actually went out and did it. 2 weeks ago, the sermon was on, anybody remember? No, I don't want to do that. I'll hear the pastor. 2 weeks ago, the sermon was on serving. And so he talked about serving as Jesus served. Easy sermon to listen to, but did we go out and do it? See, and in a life group, if you were talking about that sermon, that'd be part of it. Say, now this week, how about this? Everybody in our group gets up, first thing every morning and says, Lord, as it pleases you, lead me to someone I can serve today. And when you show up next week, we're going to ask you to share your serving experiences. So that's accountability. So in a life group, there is, by design, there's some integration of the teaching, understanding the teaching, applying the teaching, and accountability. So here, where it may just happen, here it's by design. Okay? Now, how much of the time is spent on this versus how much time is spent on other things? Well, it'll vary from group to group. Even though we have 3 kinds of groups, the groups won't all look exactly the same, even within a category. So one group may spend 8 to 10 minutes talking about the teaching and applying the teaching. Another group may spend 35 minutes. Okay? So, but the key of the life group is there is by design some portion of that group time is going to be spent talking about understanding the teaching, applying the teaching, and some accountability. And then finally, the journey groups also have, by design, discussion of teaching, applying it, and accountability. Now, the difference between these two is pretty easy. Okay? See, on this one, it just may happen spontaneously. And on this one, I wonder if that camera's picking up my bald spot. Is that low? I think not. On this one, it would look like those two are the same, life and journey. By design, they both have time for discussing the teaching, applying it, and accountability. The big difference between these two is this teaching is normally going to be, let me just call it lecture teaching. Okay, this will be, everybody went to a class in the sanctuary. They went to a class in a classroom, and they listened to a teaching. And they got to the group, and they talked about it. They had a couple questions to discuss. They had an application, suggestion, and they asked, how did you do applying that? If they went to the sanctuary and there was a teaching on reading Scripture, did they talk about it? Have you got the right kind of Bible for reading, perhaps? They talk about what kind of reading plan you're going to do next week, and next week they say, how do you do with it? But the teaching source in a life group is primarily lecture. You go to a classroom, or maybe a video, and listen to a teaching. When you get into journey groups, it's much more of a self-study group. Here in a journey group, you're more likely to be taking a book and reading it, dealing with some questions out of the book ahead of time, and preparing. When we're talking about life groups, there's basically no preparation before the class. Right? If you were in the sanctuary, this series, a class on God views, there's not anything you've got to do to prepare to walk into this teaching. You show up for the teaching, and if you were in a life group, you would talk some about the teaching. When you move into a journey group, it's self-study. So you might have a book, you read a chapter this week. And before you ever walk into group, you're expected to have done that. I may have some questions to work through. So we have one where the discussion and application is purely spontaneous as it arises. And 2, where it's much more intentional. And the distinction between these two, that's an important distinction because we're talking about at what level people are willing to plug in. So you're going to have some people that are willing to plug in and say, yeah, I can come and listen to a class and talk about it. But if you handed them a book and said, would you read a chapter a week? It may have been 40 years since they read a book. And so they just lost it. So the difference between those two is pretty big. One, you're one to show up here teaching. The other one, you're much more active in reading, studying, and assimilating that teaching before you get there. All three groups still have room and space for praise reports, for prayer requests. We won't have any kind of small group structure that says, no, we can't pray for one another. We're not going to have any kind of small group structure where we say, something's good happening in my life, but you can't tell anybody about it. We don't want to rejoice with you. We don't want to grieve with you. So that is common to all three groups. But if we're going to take some of the time here in a life group and devote it by intention to the teaching portion, to application and accountability, that means we're going to have less time to devote to some other things. So over here, I would expect to see more time on praise reports and prayer requests. PRs and PRs. Here, I'm still going to see praise reports and prayer requests, but we're probably not going to spend as much time on it because we're spending some of our time talking about the teaching. Over here, we're still going to hear praise reports and prayer requests. A lot of times over here, the praise reports are going to be incorporated into discussing the teaching. See, we read a chapter on hearing God. And we show up and say, how's that working for you? And you say, man, it's just incredible. I set aside some time and I started listening and I felt like God was speaking to me. Well, I would call that a great praise report. But instead of it really being in a category of praise reports, it's going to be incorporated in the lesson because there will be a question saying, did you set aside some time to try to listen to God? How'd that work for you? So again, you have the praise reports, prayer requests are in all three, but they're going to look a little differently the way it'll play out in those different types of groups. So when we talk about the middle group, the life groups, and we're talking about it being connected to some teaching, where's the teaching come from? We got a black pen and a black pen. I'm going to change and use the other black pen now. Right. Where will the teaching come from? I told you this is primarily lecture teaching. It may be lecture, live lecture, it may be lecture, a video lecture, but not going out and reading chapters in a book or anything. One way we've been doing the life groups is when we're all together in the sanctuary. The way we were last year is we covered 6 weeks of reading Scripture, 6 weeks of prayer. We covered a session on hearing God. We covered a session this year on transformation and the role of trying versus training. We did 12 weeks last summer on the kingdom that was in the sanctuary. But if we're all in the sanctuary and there's a teaching, this is not as complicated because all the people in your group came from the same teaching to your group. So when you say, hey, let's talk about the teaching, they all came from the same place. It gets a little more complicated when you're dealing with electives. Because what happens? Different people go different electives. We had some great electives the last elective session. Ken taught a class. It was really a great class. Raymond taught a class. Mike and not last time. When did you teach? Last elective cycle. No, one before that. Okay, and then Mike and Kay taught one before it, and then Kay. So we've had some good electives, but what happens now, I've got 12 people in my living room, and they came from 4 different classes. And we're going to talk about what did you learn in class. It's really hard to have that discussion because they came from 4 separate places. And so when we're doing electives, I found this a little more challenging. Some things I thought might happen didn't happen, just dynamics and the way it shook out. So when we go into an elective cycle, if you want to have a life group where you can spend some time talking about the teaching, applying the teaching, there's some options that are available for those kinds of groups. One option is you find out ahead of time. Ooh, that part stings. That means I've got to get ahead of the curve and let you as group leaders know that here's our class lineup that's coming up. Okay? And then as a group leader, you pray about it. And you seek God. And then you say, okay, group, guess what? We got new electives coming up, and our class, our small group, is going to discuss the teaching that goes on in the class on, just pick a topic, service. Service and others. Okay? So there's going to be a class coming up on service and others, and when we spend our group time talking about the class, applying it, and accountability, we're going to talk about the service class. You know, there's some other classes you can go to if you want to, but you're going to be a little bit out of the loop when we start talking about it, because that's the one we're going to talk about. After that, that's just my idea of just leading the group. Say, I'm the leader, and I prayed about it, and I've sought God, and that's what I think would be good for our group to do. So that would be one option when we're in electives. People have different places to go, that you kind of gently encourage your folks to be in a class, so when you get together, you can talk about that class. That would be one option. Now, when we start doing this, Pastor and I have this idea. Sometimes there's a pretty big gulf between our ideas and getting it all the bugs worked out. But when we have electives, our plan is to have electives that are designated as life classes. Now, what will that mean? That will mean that's a very appropriate class for a life group. That will mean if you're in that class, you're going to have a couple discussion questions, you're going to have an application suggestion, and you'll have what you need in your hands to help your group walk through that teaching. So if there's an elective cycle, maybe 3 or 4 classes, maybe 1 or 2 of them are life classes, and those will be the classes that will be really well set up for a life group. Well, what if you choose another class? Well, you can, but you're not going to have the discussion questions, the application. Okay? Now, are these like some superior, higher form of artificial intelligence classes or something? No, they're just ones that are well suited toward the small group discussion of the class. So when we get into electives, one option, try to get your folks into a given class. Another option, and we haven't put any meat on the bones on this because really we don't want to do it unless somebody's excited about doing it. And that is, during the electives, instead of your discussion being based on the classroom, everybody with different classes, the discussion could be on the sermon from Sunday. And we can provide you with questions to discuss the sermon and apply the sermon. It wouldn't take a whole lot to do that, for a pastor to do that, because he's the one that have to do it. But we don't want to do it unless somebody finds that to be of value. Raymond and Becky's group did this several sessions during the electives. They would go to the sermon. Raymond would take notes, kind of think of some discussion questions. So when they came back on Wednesday, they're discussing that Sunday's sermon. Great thing is, if you miss Sunday, you got 3 days to go online and see it. And then by the time people show up in the group, then this, by design, application of teaching could be based on the sermon series that's going on while we're doing electives on Wednesday night. Did you follow what I said there? Now that's going to really take somebody saying, hey, we want to do that, and we're committed to doing that, and then Pastor will work on developing the questions for the sermon. If we do that, you're interested in doing it, our commitment would be to get them to you ahead of time so you've got the discussion questions while you're listening to the sermon. So you can listen to the sermon with those questions in mind. The nice thing about this is if you got people in your group that aren't even coming on Wednesdays, a group may well do well doing it on the sermons. I don't want it to sound confusing, but I do want you thinking outside the box. So it doesn't always have to be, we're going to go sit in the sanctuary and then we're going to go to a class and talk about it. It can be based on teaching. It could be based on a sermon series. It could be based on a video series. An elective rolls around, and we got 3 or 4 electives, and Ken and Grace pray, and they say, this is what we hear the Holy Spirit saying. Our group really needs to focus on prayer for 6 weeks. And we've got, just so happens, we've got 6 weeks of DVDs on teaching on prayer. We've got the written questions. We've got the application. So we say, hey, you can take those DVD series and do one of 2 things with it. We can make it an elective class, where we have an elective based on the DVDs, and when your group goes back and talk about it, or they can just head to their house at 6:30. Plug in the DVD, 6 weeks on prayer, play the DVD, talk about it, go straight into small group. Now, when I say that, that's not an invitation for you to rush out to Lifeway and start buying DVD curriculum for Wednesday night. I'll tell you, I've practiced what I'm about to preach. On Wednesday night, it's community church small group ministry. It's community church teaching. And if there's something you want to do, then come see us and we'll talk about it. When I was writing the curriculum for the discipleship groups, I took it to Brother David, I took it to Pastor Daniel and said, hey, this is what I'm going to be teaching in my living room. Y'all take a look at it. Brother David, as usual, was like, looks good to me. I was real honored. I don't think he really read it, but looks good to me. Pastor Daniel really read it, and he had a couple of places. He said, oh, I don't see it that way. I said, no problem. If you know how to use Word, I highlighted, I deleted, said fine. And if it's something you're not comfortable with, I'll pull it out. And when it gets comfortable with it, I'll put it back in. I'm sorry, that's what Paul said. Now, why am I telling you that and joking about it? Because I'm submitted to the authority of our church. Okay? So if you want to have something you want to teach on Wednesday night, then we expect you to pass it by us. You want to teach it on Tuesday morning in your living room and buy coffee and donuts? That's your living room Tuesday morning. Okay? Gloria has a ladies group, meets in her home. She doesn't, as far as I know, come down here and have anybody look at the stuff ahead of time. She's doing a group there. Does good stuff. But on Wednesday night, there's some options, and we've got a lot of them. We've got several series that are on DVDs if somebody wants to use those. If somebody is a good teacher and feels comfortable teaching, somebody like Ken can say, look, I'm going to take the 6 weeks on prayer. I'll look at the videos, but I'm just going to do it in my own words. I'll just teach it and cover those same topics. That'd be fine too. So the options start getting bigger, and this starts getting good because you may have some people that can't get here for the 6:30 class. So you just give them a copy of the videos. Say, hey, here's the videos we're going to be using. You watch it, be a group by 7:30, and we'll discuss the video. You've already seen it. So you start seeing some enhanced flexibility in there. Another option there is you can use, sometimes when we're in the sanctuary, we record the videos on the church webpage. Okay? Well, what you can do is your Wednesday night group could be 1 week behind. See, where we teach tonight, not tonight, it's not Wednesday, we teach Wednesday, and your group members have all week to watch that teaching on the video online. And the next week, that's when you'll be talking about that teaching. Well, by then we got another teaching online. They got a week to watch it. So you're 1 week behind, but you're still by design incorporated. It's just about impossible to really make sense of all of that in this setting. But if you're interested in doing this, the best thing to do is say, hey, let's set up an appointment and get together and talk about the options that seem workable for our group, for our setting. And all I want to really do here is get your brain whirling so you understand nobody's saying you got to herd everybody into the same spot to have a life. A lot of options there, and I think as group leaders you're in good position to seek God and start having some suggestions how we can do that. When we talk about the 3 types of groups, let me come back to that. Journey groups. Somebody remind me after a while. Did you come back to it? Because I'll forget. Journey groups. The journey groups, I told you, there's also some intentionality here, but this is when we move into self-study. This is when we hand somebody a book and say, read a chapter a week. It may be a book like The Life You Always Wanted by Ortberg. Maybe a book like Good, Beautiful God. Maybe a book, Bait of Satan, by John Bevere. But we're going to expect somebody at this level to go out and read something. Now, that's a big step. And so, by definition, that's going to eliminate some people from that stage at some point in their life. At some point in their life, they may be saying, great, I'm ready to read. But if they're not, then obviously they're not a good candidate for this type of group. In these type of groups, it's primarily self-study and then structured group discussion. These care groups, come back to it. You don't have to ask me. Care groups are normally going to be open groups. What's open mean? Open means, newsflash, it's okay to invite your friends. It's okay for your members to invite their friends. It's okay to invite people in the church that aren't plugged into a group. Now, we're not talking about running out trying to talk people into quitting their group and joining your group. But, there's a lot of people here who aren't plugged into a group. It's very intimidating just to wander in and go, I think I'll just go visit a group tonight. Most people that have come to a group are come to a group because they were invited. And you're going to be in a position to talk to them a few minutes and know whether you're inviting them to the right place for where they're at. That's an important aspect. So these are normally going to be open groups. No problem. Somebody shows up, first time, January the 20th or February or July, doesn't matter, it's an open group. These groups are normally going to be open groups too, but a leader may decide to close the group just for a given study. They may say, we're going to spend 6 weeks on prayer, and it's going to be pretty challenging for somebody to come in week 4 and not have the background and the foundation we built. So for 6 weeks, we're going to work on prayer, and then we'll reopen and invite our friends to come in the next time. So these will normally be open, but a leader may see some wisdom just for a small period of time to say, we're going to stick to a topic here and work through that topic and then reopen. These groups are normally closed groups. They're going to be a much more structured study, and if you come in halfway through it or a third of the way through it, it's just about possible to jump in and get on board. These groups, how long do they last? Well, forever. I mean, theoretically, you're in a care group, you just stay in the group. These groups normally are going to be long-term groups, but they may be defined by short-term topics. So we have a life group. Ronnie and Gloria Lee's group would be a good example of this. And so they said, well, we got a life group. We're going to have a life group next month. We had a life group last month. We're doing 6 weeks on prayer right now. We're doing 6 weeks on Bible study. But again, kind of open-ended. These groups probably ask the most of people, but thank God there's an end in sight. You don't sign up to say, I'm going to study and read and go through stuff until Jesus comes back. You say, well, for 10 weeks, I want to be a part of this good, beautiful God study, which would be a journey group. Why is it a journey group? Because you hand them a book. You say, read chapter 1 by next week. So we'll move from listening to a lecture to moving into self-study. So these groups are normally going to be for a defined period of time, whether it's a 10-week Good and Beautiful God group, whether it's a 70-week curriculum group, whether you're doing Good and Beautiful God and then moving into Good and Beautiful Life, and then Good and Beautiful Community, which makes it about 30 weeks, probably. So these groups normally are for a defined period of time. The other two are open-ended. The options, just like there's a number of options here, there's a number of options here. One's what I just mentioned, Good and Beautiful God series. We've got a 70-week curriculum series that some groups are doing now. That's been renamed. Who won the lottery? I think Jenny wanted to win. If you don't remember what you suggested, you won, Jenny. It was walking in the footsteps of Jesus. That was your suggestion, in case you don't remember. But when we first put together that 70-week curriculum, we didn't really have a name for it. We just called it Discipleship Group. It was just going to be one group. But we want discipleship to be much more than a given curriculum. So that's why discipleship isn't even up there. If you're going through a 70-week study, that's a journey group. Why? It's self-study. It's closed once it starts, and it's for a limited period of time. So the statement you heard Pastor say, I think it's a very good statement about adult small group ministry, is all of our groups care, all of our groups disciple. Okay? Because we're talking about the same thing. So you say, well, if I'm in a journey group, I don't have to care. Yeah, you still got to care. And nobody's saying you don't care, and don't call and be mad at us because you're saying we don't care anymore. You say, well, we've been a care group for 28 years, now you're calling us a life group. Yep. I mean, that's the way we're trying to communicate that in this group you're doing something a little different. Now, some of you have been around a while, and you go back to those very first lessons we did on the stages of discipleship. Come and see, come and follow me, come and be with me, remain in me, and how Jesus met these people at different stages. And then his goal was to move them into life in the kingdom. His goal was to train them to do what he taught them to do. His goal was to help them enter into the life that God was calling them to live. And one of the questions asked is that at which one of these stages was he doing the work of God? Easy question. The answer was every one of them. So every one of these groups will be doing what's important for the people in that group. So there's no hierarchy there. There's not a matter of, we might have a brand new convert. Go straight to a journey group. The illustrations kind of the groups, I told you, this life group is something the Lees are doing. The Duhans are doing it. They've recruited Doug and Rick to handle the discussion part, which was a great idea. You had two leaders and said, we want to do this, but we're going to invite somebody else to take the notes and be ready to lead that discussion. Pastor is doing a class called First Steps. And his First Steps class is essentially a class with a life group following. Because people come to the class, they hear the class in the first hour, and then a number of them stay with him for the second hour. And what do? They just don't even bat an eye. They just keep right on talking and discussing what they just heard, which would be the example of a life group. Is that a hand? I'm going to get to you.
Oh, just...
Yeah?
I never got back with you when we were right on time opening in. We decided to go ahead and do that. So,
The continuation?
right.
Okay,
People
good.
are
Is
not
that-
in here, but
Say it again.
Session more come for
Okay. Good. I'm going to announce that, and then I'm going to let you say that again loudly. When we talk about, and you heard Pastor mention, I think it was this Sunday, care groups, life groups, and journey groups. As leaders, we want you to know what those words mean. So I'm going to give you a handout. It's got all my speaking notes for this, and then you'll see we'll develop some written materials to put in people's hands. And our goal is to be able to talk to somebody and kind of hear some things that will help us decide where they need to be. Because of the nature of the group, there are certain variables that will help control where the person goes. For instance, attendance. You probably have some people in your group that I think some of you filled out a sheet for me a year and a half ago. I said, list the ones you're shocked if they don't show up, and the ones you're shocked when they do. That's two different groups, right? And then the ones that's kind of toss up. May be here, may not. Well, there are some folks that are very, very faithful. And there's other people who are less faithful. Now, when I say faithful, I'm just talking about how regular they're there. The ones that I say are less faithful, maybe a shift work. Working days one week, 12 hours. Working nights, 12 hours. And so for them, half the time they're tied up. And then they have kids doing taekwondo and jiu-jitsu and dancing and baseball and all the sports. And so for these folks, showing up about 1 week out of 4 is the best it's going to get. Okay? So if I've got somebody, I'm talking to them, and they say, look, I want to get in a group. Well, tell me a little bit about yourself. And they start telling me what's going on in their life. And I said, well, it sounds to me like, probably about 1 week out of 4 is the most you're going to be able to be here. Yeah, that's probably about right now. Well, down here it'd be crazy. So, yeah, I mean, I got to read a chapter every week. Well, I'm not going to read a chapter, probably. But it just doesn't work when you've got a more integrated study and you're missing 3 weeks out of 4. Might work in here, it'd be tough. So somebody, 1 week out of 4, probably I'd be more likely to suggest, let's get you started a care group. As you see value in it, you may be able to do what some of these people have done. Guy Menard, it's not unusual for a guy to take a couple hours of vacation so he can be at group. Well, you don't always start out there. I think he did. It's kind of weird. He just like got serious about this God stuff and just started doing it. Well, most folks aren't going to start out there. So he said, well, what are you saying? The care group people don't show up? Well, no, not at all. You got people that show up for care group every week without fail. You would grab the phone and call them if they weren't there. You'd be sure they weren't a wreck. But if I got somebody telling me about 1 week out of 4, this is probably going to be the best fit for them right now. If I talk to them about how much time do you have to devote yourself to things outside of group. And they say, well, I got this going, I got this going, I got this going. I'm doing all I do just to show up at group. I haven't got any time to do anything outside of group. Well, obviously, I'm not going to give them a book and say, read chapter 1 by next week. They just told me they don't have time to do that. This would be a pretty big challenge because here we're going to ask some application. We just had teaching on reading Scripture. This week, everybody in the group, read your Bible, read this reading plan. We'll talk about it next week. It's going to be a tough fit for them. Again, that's not saying this is some beginner level, but for where they're at, this may be the best place to put them. And what we want to try to do is get people in the right place to start with instead of trying to shuffle them around after they find out it's a bad fit. For one reason, it's hard to shuffle people. After they feel like they're at home, it's hard to move. It's hard to let them go. You know, I've talked about my kittens a lot lately. So, but really, those cats make me crazy. But we gave one away, and just, man, that was hard. We got another that we want to give away, but I don't know if we can or not. Well, that's cats. Cats are a lot easier than people, you understand. But some people are hard to give away, too. And then some are like boomerangs, you know. Don't record that. Too late. But, so attendance is an issue that we've got to look at the person and be realistic. What's a good fit for them, given their current life situation, their current level of attendance. Participation in the church's teaching. We got some people, wonderful group members that come in groups. They don't go to this church and just show up for the group. And so they're not going to be down here listening to a class. And when it's time to talk about the class, that's going to be a harder fit in here. Now remember, I told you, even within a category, the groups may not all look the same. If we're spending 10 minutes of our group time talking about the teaching, then having somebody in a group that didn't go to the teaching is not that big a deal. You know, they're not going to feel like, oh, they just went off and left me. But if I'm spending 30 minutes on discussing the teaching and how to apply it, and I got somebody that doesn't want to come to any of the classes, it's really hard to plug them in there. See, so what do? We find the right place to fit them in and help them get to a good start. So, care groups, life groups, journey groups, when do they meet? Well, Wednesday night is available for any one of these three. Why? Because childcare is on Wednesday night. So if they need childcare, they need to be on Wednesday night. We could come in and say, well, here's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday groups. And then none of them are on the same night. And then the people that work with our children would all pull their hair out and go crazy because we'd have to have childcare for 3 nights. So for any given group, whether it's a care group, a life group, journey group, Wednesday night is available. Some groups choose to meet on a different night. We've got a journey group meeting on Tuesday night right now. We've had them on Sunday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night. So nobody signed up for Friday or Saturday nights yet. And we ask you to leave Monday night open, so we have one night a week that we have leaders get together. At one time we had groups on Monday night too, and it was just, no matter what night we scheduled the meeting, somebody couldn't miss, and I had to pick who we would shut out. So they're all available for Wednesday. We've seen a lot more of these groups go to off nights, partly by design, because you've got people that are working with children on Wednesday. Well, if they're going to be in a group like this, then it's got to be another night. I'd love to see a care group that says, hey, how about we meet on Tuesday? And all these people that are working with the children, they don't even have a group. We could have a care group with a lot of children workers and meet with them Tuesday. Well, what are you going to do for child care? I don't know. I mean, that's something you got to work through, work out. But by thinking outside the box, we can open up small group ministries to a lot of other people. So he might accept Monday. If you just had to do it, I could talk to you about it. I'd rather not. We've been in that box before. It's hard. Where we automatically said, you know, you can't ever show up at another leaders meeting because your group was on the night we're having our leaders meetings. So let me just open up for questions. Questions or comments between care, life, journey group. Anything that's unclear, anything you want to clarify. I've had guys go to teach and they ask for questions and I didn't understand anything they said and I couldn't even begin to ask a question. As I'm leaving that invitation dangling there, let me say this. As we put together some written materials, sending people to groups is not real scientific always. I'm not always sitting down with somebody and spending 20 minutes with them and then picking a group. Okay? Sometimes it's other leaders sending them to a group. So as we develop materials explaining for our church, care, and life, and journey groups, we won't be able to say, we have something called care groups. And this is what they consist of. And here's a list of our care groups. And we have some life groups. And that's what it consists of. Here's our life groups. And we have some journey groups. That's what it consists of. Here's our journey groups. In order to do that, I got to know where you fit on that list. And I've got a pretty good idea, but I don't want to make a bad assumption. So over the next 14 days, 2 weeks, I'm going to be asking you, where do you see yourself? And I put you on the list. Do you want to be on this list? Or be on this list? Or be on this list? And that way, I don't assume something and then find out that I've made a bad assumption. Within that structure, there are specialty groups that I haven't even talked about, but they'll effectively fit into one of those categories. We have people that have a need for inner healing and deliverance. And so we have cleansing stream ministry, cleansing stream discipleship groups. And so it's pretty easy to look at this and say, well, we expect them to do some things. We expect them to read and put some effort in. So you say, well, that's where it fits. The headings aren't always that crucial when we get into specialty groups. The specialty groups will shake out along the same lines as either knowing what are we asking of the people in that group. If you had a divorce recovery group started, it might be a care group, divorce recovery group. See, where you just get together and talk about hurting and how you can pray. Or you might have a divorce recovery life group. We say, what we're going to do is get with people that are recovering from divorce and help them work through that by praying, reading their Bible. And we're going to do some of that teaching. Or you may have some of them down here. So just because it's a specialty group doesn't mean it doesn't fit in somehow. All the small group ministries will fit in one place or another. And we want to help people just understand how those all come together. I'm going to let Pastor close in a minute. He's going to clean up any messes I've made before, so we can think about his cleanup detail here. And he'll answer any questions you have. Let me give you a little group news. What's going on? We've got a new group just started. Regina Reeves and Lauren Gartshore, like Cartshore. And they are doing a new group on Wednesday night, second hour, called Single Moms. And that's for, I shouldn't even have to go any further than that, should I? Single moms. And so they'll be working. Well, you may have some single moms in your groups that they're doing just fine in your group. We're always trying to pull them all out, put them in there. But you may know some single moms that just felt like, I just don't fit anywhere. You know, these other people, they have spouses. And so we want to have a place where those ladies can go and be ministered to. And last week was the first week of the meeting call this week and say, hey, how did it go? So I will make that call. But that's the newest group that's been formed. We've got a new journey group. That's Andy and Risa Adams have partnered with Jimmy and Kay Sims, and they've started a 70-week curriculum. They went through about a 4-week introductory study, just kind of see, if everybody can hang. And then they've started, and they're probably, how far, Angie? Week 2 or 3? One. Into, well, that means they got a lot of ground left to cover. So they're up and running, and that group meets on a Tuesday night in Andy and Risa's home. Raymond and Becky Joyner started out as a life group a year and a half ago, getting with people after class, discussing the class, discussing the teaching, how to apply the teaching, some accountability. And they built up that group over a year and a half, and just last week they transitioned from a life group into a journey group. What do I mean by that? They went into a study called Good and Beautiful God. Their group members got a copy of the book, Good and Beautiful God. And so last week they had their first week of Good and Beautiful God study. They'll spend 10 weeks doing that this summer, and then the plan is in the fall they'll remain a journey group, but they'll transition into the 70-week curriculum. Those are all timely things because Raymond got to spend a week with James Ryan Smith, who wrote Good and Beautiful God, the 2 weeks before they started that group. And I'm jealous because his group members got signed copies of the book by James Ryan Smith. We can't arrange that on a whole-scale basis. But that's not a new group, but it's a transitioning group as the people are moving, the group is redefining itself. Gene and Kim Allen transitioned similarly. They started out as a life group, meeting here at the church, and transitioned into it's life group, meeting here at the church. Then last fall went into a journey group. They went through the Good and Beautiful God study, and they have, as of January, started the 70-week curriculum. And Sam and Eric Bush are co-leading that group with them. So again, not a new group, but a transition. A new group this year was Keith and Nancy Mosley, assisted by the Zilks. And they're doing a life group, which means their people are going to a teaching, and they're showing up in the class talking about the teaching and how to apply it and work it out in their own life. We've got Pastor Daniel started the First Steps class, which is transitioning nicely into a group after the class. That's a 6-week cycle, and that class started over last week. This fall, we've got a new journey group coming. I'll mess it up because it sounded like it was like 22 leaders for that group. I'm not sure. But I know I talked to Debbie Duncan on the phone about it, and Debbie and several other ladies, don't get me in trouble, try to name all of them, are looking at starting a journey group this fall for women only. And we have some other ministries for women only, about single moms. That's a women's small group. We've got Martha Zaruba is doing Unequally Yoked, which is for women. And then for the ones that are at this stage and are saying, hey, we want to do some study and investigation, we've got that group starting. So a lot of exciting things going on. Don mentioned he's teaching a class on Psalms this 6 weeks. And when he finishes that class, at the end of the class period, he and Rhonda are going to have a group that will just continue out of the class. So if you were in the class, then you would just continue in the discussion of Psalms as you were. Big hand back in. I heard you last time. As you were in the class, you would continue discussion of Psalms. But if you weren't in the class, was that what you were raising your hand for? Yeah, that's the guy you just told me that to. If you weren't in the class and you're not plugged into a group, we all relate. But if you're not, then that would be a group you could go to and just enter into that discussion, because the class would be based on the church reading plan out of Psalms, which y'all are all doing, right? Amen. Hallelujah. Really, Psalms is great. It's been a long time since I've read through Psalms. So, a lot of interesting things going on. And the biggest overarching thing I want you to take away is community church exists to help people become fully devoted followers of Christ. And that's the heart and passion of the pastor. And the small groups exist to do exactly that. Help people become fully devoted followers of Christ. We want to meet people where they're at and move them down that pathway. And so we'll give you the handout on the way out. Pastor's going to speak a few minutes and close us out. And then we got dessert and some sandwiches and chips.
Hey guys, I want to tell you one. I just applaud you, what you do. we can't say it enough. I meant what I said yesterday. For our people to truly develop, we can experience God's presence and power in the sanctuary. We can be convicted and admonished there. But real life change, transformation happens in your living rooms. When you talk to people, when you invest in their lives. I look back at my life. I'm who I am today, not because of the great sermons I heard, but I've heard some great ones. But because I spent time with people and their lives rubbed off on me and changed me at a very, I would say, spiritually cellular level. Overall, changed my life. So I applaud what you're doing. Thank you for serving so faithfully. Thank you for your patience. I know over the last year and a half, when we started these meetings, we met y'all to death for the first year. And your tongues were dragging and you kept coming. And you heard us say things that sometimes were just almost offensive. You're going, these guys are crazy. Because we're trying to figure out the vocabulary. And then we'd say a word and we'd see the whites of your eyes. And we'd go back and I think that word wasn't the right word. And so we've worked very hard on it. Thank you for your patience as we've gone through it. I will say this. Everything that we're talking about is, in my mind, about moving people from being passive learners to self-feeders. And that's really the movement. Relationships are everywhere. Jesus has called us to build relationships with everyone. But if you'll notice, we're asking a little bit more of the individual every time to become more active in self-feeding. Because when you're a self-feeder, you're ready to help feed other people. When Jesus looked at Peter and said, "Do you love me?" Well, what was his response? When Peter said, "You know I love you," he said, "Then what? Feed my sheep." He wanted him to tend them and feed them and take care of them. Well, that's what we're asking of you, and that's what you've committed to. And I just can't say thank you enough. And so as you've learned to feed, we want to help other people take that same journey, because we believe that God's doing great things here in Orange. And we're going to have more people that we know what to do with that aren't going to learn that way. So we're going to move them to this process to where they learn to self-feed. And let me give you an example. Before the series on Jesus Habits, we talked out of Ephesians chapter 4 and the calling of God on each of our lives. How many of you found something in your life you go, man, that preacher, teacher, pastor, evangelist, apostle, you go, something just jumped out at me. Don't make me feel bad. Someone has something, please. All right. Well, in my mind, this framework lets us talk about those things. I'm thinking if someone came up and said, for the first time, they said, that's who God made me to be, a prophet. I never understood it before, but I long to see people come into a right relationship with Jesus, and I hear His voice, and they're in a care group situation, and they've heard of preaching, and they've been loved on. And then Ken Rucker says, hey, I'm going to do a teaching on it. And he comes and he gets a teaching, and he does a teaching on ministry and the prophetic. And someone says, Ken, that is changing my life. And Ken said, I'm telling you, you need to grow in that and keep developing it. And then, lo and behold, later we hear someone say, I'm going to build a study for 15 weeks around the prophetic ministry. It's going to have homework and study, but we're going to develop a school of prophets. Well, guess what? We just walk someone with a calling on their life through the process of identifying who they are, getting a little bit of faith, and then really helping them to become who God called them to be. And we have that with pastors, teachers, evangelists, at every level. And that's only part of it. Mary Beth in the fall, a group of ladies will be starting Grief Share. People that have gone through hurt and loss. They're going to be like a life group that is going to meet. So we're trying to find every way that we can help people from where they are to move to where God's called them to be. Isn't that exciting? Isn't that exciting that you're a part of that? I look at your lives. I was just looking at LaBelle and Jackie. They don't know I stare at them all the time. I was looking at them over there, and I was thinking, how faithful they are. How long have y'all been in small group ministry? About 17 years. You've heard Miss Melba talk about it. You've heard Jackie Achilles talk about it. You've heard Les Patton talk about it. Joe Will talk about it. There's a knucklehead in there, Daniel Rose talk about it. Now Dennis Powell talk about it. Probably doesn't hear a whole lot of brand new stuff. Just, wow, never heard that before, but faithful. There's something about being faithful. And so what I want to encourage you to do is you think about moving people through the process. The Bible tells us in 2 Timothy 2:2 that we are to find what kind of men? Faithful men, and we'll add women. Faithful men and women. Because when we find them, we can pour everything God's poured into us, into them, and trust them that they're going to pour it into other lives. And what I love about this process is we allow you to decide who is it that God's called you to. Because if God has called you to the people who've not tasted enough life to rearrange their lives around the things of God, but you say, I love Care Group because I love those people that their lives are dragging them in every which way but loose. But you get in there and they can watch you and they start saying, well, how do you do it? Well, I started arranging my life around the things of Christ. That's why you're not stressed all the time. You're not running all over. Yeah, well, how'd you all do that? Well, let me tell you about it. There's a class that's built around arranging your life around the practices of Christ. And you just walk them through the process. But you may say, my starting point is there. I've got a great friend that he loves this process. That's what he loves. He can do this. He's been through this, but this is what he loves. And he's where he's supposed to be. And so let's think about the trust that that takes. Because if he's here and he loves it, but he sees someone ready to take the next step, guess what he has to do? He has to trust you so much that this person he has invested in is not going to be lost when he passes through. Because just like Dennis passing the kitten causes tears in his eyes. But I'm just kidding. I love that. My whole image is distorted now. Just like that. I'm thinking of the times that Chuck and Dee Dee walked someone through cleansing stream and see them being healed and learning to trust again. And then they have to turn them over into somebody else's group. And I can imagine when they go, I trust them, yes, go there, versus, I don't know if they're going to love on them. I don't know if they're going to protect their heart the way we did. That's why we have to get together. And the reason we some dessert afterward is that's in that fellowship. We trust one another. Please never hear that we're more proud of one group than the other. That is not true. We are ecstatic about leadership. I will make one correction. It's not first steps, it's starting point. Because I'll get too many names go around, I get confused. Starting point ministries. Let me talk to you a little bit about that as group leaders so you'll know what's going on. Right now, if you're new to the church or make a fresh commitment to Christ, we want a starting point. We go over God is good. What does it mean that we serve a good God? I'll be amazed, you would be amazed how many people come in and have such a messed up view of God. When they've got a messed up view of God, that affects their prayer life, it affects everything. Then we talk about the beauty of being forgiven, celebrating forgiveness and what that means. We talk about worship and entering into His presence. We talk about the Word of God being a letter to us. And then we talk about how to talk to God and how we've been invited to have a conversation life with God. And through that process, we're really just giving them the framework to understand what it means to be a follower, to send them out with a little bit of a base as they go into small groups. What we really need there is someone to be able, that you could say to me or Dennis, hey, I've got someone ready to be a group leader. We've trained them up, they're ready. Because right now, that's a ready-made group. They don't know where to go right now. And I'm trying to figure out how can I lead their group and do a new one in here. Because they've connected. People are connecting. I used to think it took 10 weeks, 2 months to connect. It doesn't. These people are coming in hungry and they're connecting in 3 and 5 weeks and ready. And we need more leaders. We need more leaders. So I'm asking for your help there. The next thing that you're going to see as this red room gets more developed and more people start using it, it's going to be our starting point. I've talked to Amy Weekly a little bit about it. We're going to talk to some others about when people come to the church new, that on Wednesday nights, not only will they be able to eat with us and we'll have a table set up for that, we haven't quite worked all that out yet, but our visitors will be able to come, we'll be able to get them connected at the red room, show them to the rooms that they'll be starting, and people will walk with them. Let me tell you how important this is that we develop it. Sunday, I walked by a lady, she has a pink shirt on, blue jeans, a little girl in a little yellow polka dotted dress right there. And I make the trip between my office and there probably about 7 times on a Sunday morning. Part of it's ADD, I don't know what to do myself. I stand around too long, I kind of move. And so I walk it back and forth, and no real reason I'm just walking back and forth, and I think about some weird stuff. I need a paper clip, so I run my arms to get a paper clip. Well, I'm walking back and forth, so I walked by her 3 times. And finally, somebody else would stop talking to her. And so I thought, I'm going to go talk to her. I walked over there and introduced her. How are you doing? It was her first time to be here. She had never been here before. She had checked in with the children over there, but didn't realize where the entrance was over here. So she and her child were sitting there, very nice, watching all of us walk by, having our own conversations, doing our own little thing. And she was thinking someone was going to show up and whisk her child away. And I said, oh, is she a little girl? You already checked her in? Yeah, we're just waiting to be picked up. I said, someone's going to pick you up? I said, we started a new pickup ministry. I didn't know that. It was a great idea, though. That would be cool. Have a little car, come pick them up. But so I said, oh, let me walk you around where it is. Just by stopping and talking to her, suddenly her face lit up. She goes around, she introduces. And when they get back there, kid loves it. She comes to us at the Red Room afterward, tells us how much she loves community church. But for 15 or 20 minutes, she sat there by herself. That's where leaders, we desperately need help. Showing us, making sure that we don't drop the ball on that kind of stuff. And then when we have a visitor that knows Christ, they don't need a starting point. They know Jesus. They come from a healthy church. How do they crack this nut called community? We're not an easy nut to crack sometimes, are we? And so, what can we do in that process? So I'm asking for your help in that area as well. So a lot of good things going on. I really appreciate what you're doing. I wanted to let you know about the new ministries with the grief share and other things going on. But thank you again for all that you do. I don't know that I can clarify anything Dennis said except for not first steps, starting point. Other than that, I thank you. We need to close out.